I never thought I'd need to sign a lease to stay in my own daughter's house. Yet there I was, sitting at her gleaming marble kitchen island, pen in hand, staring at a 4-page rental agreement drafted by her lawyer husband, Craig. My name, Margaret Hill, was typed neatly at the top, right under the words Tenant Agreement. Just below that, the monthly occupancy fee had been highlighted in yellow, $1, $200. Utilities not included. This just keeps everything clean and formal, Mom, Julia had said breezily, sipping from her $18 oat milk latte as if she were discussing a guest list, not my living arrangements. Clean and formal. As if 38 years of raising her, nursing her through asthma attacks, tutoring her through calculus, sewing every school play costume by hand, could be reduced to a transaction. I hadn't asked to move in out of convenience. I hadn't come with baggage or attitude. I'd arrived with a single suitcase and the trembling remnants of a life upended, widowhood, a pension slashed in half, and a house swallowed by a reverse mortgage fine print no one warned me about. You'll have the guest room, Julia continued, tapping her manicured nails against her iPad. Of course, you'll need to keep it tidy. Craig's office is just across the hall, and he's on calls all day. And please, no strong cooking smells. He's very sensitive. Sensitive. This, from a man who once laughed at my lemon meringue pie and called it cute. I looked at my daughter across the island. She wore soft beige cashmere and a cool expression I didn't recognize. She'd become the kind of woman who arranged decorative books by spine color and posted laundry hacks to Instagram for likes. The kind of woman who introduced me to friends as my mom, Margaret. She used to be a librarian, as though my past was something quaint and irrelevant, like an antique doily. I thought this would just be temporary, I murmured, until I got back on my feet. Julia didn't look up. It is. That's why the lease is month to month. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sadness, not yet. Something harder, more brittle. I signed the paper. Great, she said, plucking the lease from under my hand before the ink had dried. Craig will file this tonight. No welcome hug. No, I'm so glad you're here, Mom. Just the dry rustle of a legal document being folded and filed. That night, I moved into the guest room at the far end of their ultra-modern home in Glenhaven Estates, a gated community where every house looked like it had been copied from a lifestyle magazine. The room smelled faintly of potpourri and ambition. It had no pictures on the walls, no books, no warmth. Just a pristine white bed, a tiny desk, and a digital clock that blinked 12 o'clock as though time had frozen. Julia didn't ask about my finances. She didn't ask how I lost the house. She didn't ask how I was sleeping, or if I'd eaten since the funeral. My late husband's death 6 weeks earlier had shattered the fragile scaffolding of my life, but to her, it was merely a logistical wrinkle. You'll want to start looking for part-time work, she'd said that afternoon while arranging throw pillows. Just so you're not idle. Idle. As if grief was laziness. As if survival wasn't already a full-time job. That first week, I learned the rules of the house the way one might study a foreign language. Don't vacuum while Craig's working. Don't take long showers. Water bills high. Don't use the main oven without permission. And above all, don't move anything. Not a vase. Not a charger. Not a coaster. I was given a shelf in the fridge, a drawer in the bathroom, and a stack of gray towels marked guest. But what stayed with me most was the small gold plaque on the outside of my door. It read, "Welcome to Glenhaven Guest Suite." Not Mom's room. Not even Margaret's room. Just guest. Every morning I woke early and made myself invisible. I tiptoed to the kitchen to make tea, wiping the counters twice so they passed Julia's white glove scrutiny. I washed their coffee mugs. I folded their laundry when Julia forgot. I put away groceries without being asked. And still, I received notes. Post-its with polite corrections. Please don't move Craig's protein bars. Next time, rinse the sink after cleaning berries. We use the Dyson on low setting only. Each one a paper cut. Each one a reminder that I was not truly welcome, only tolerated. I reminded myself this was temporary, that I would find my way again. But something inside me had begun to shift. A whispering awareness. Julia had forgotten who I was. And somewhere along the line, I had too. Before long, the rest of Glenhaven would remember. And so would she. Because I had not come here broken, only bruised. And I hadn't raised a daughter to treat family like tenants. But if she insisted on formality, then she was about to learn what formality looked like when applied by someone who'd once run an entire city library system, negotiated five-figure funding grants, and taught debate for fun. The guest suite was temporary, but the lesson I was about to teach would be permanent. Before we continue, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to more powerful stories like this one. The first sign that something bigger was brewing came the second weekend after I moved in. Julia stood at the head of the glass dining table, speaking in a bright, almost sugary voice to a group of women who all looked like they'd stepped out of the same catalog. Hair sleek, nails shellacked, smiles sharp. These weren't friends. These were prospects. "Thank you all so much for coming," Julia beamed. "I know Saturdays are hectic, but I promise this won't take more than an hour. And trust me, once you see what the Glenhaven Wellness Collective has to offer." "Oh, honey, take your time," one woman drawled, already holding up a branded tumbler filled with cucumber water. "I haven't been out of the house in days." I stood just inside the kitchen, stirring lentil soup and listening as my daughter launched into a rehearsed pitch about holistic luxury, affluent self-optimization, and transformational living. Each phrase more meaningless than the last, but spoken with the conviction of someone who believed every syllable. She was selling a lifestyle, her lifestyle. "Some of you have asked how I do it all," Julia said, gesturing to her immaculate home, her toned figure, her smiling children, strategically absent today, of course. "It's about systems, boundaries, discipline, and surrounding yourself with people who elevate your energy, not drain it." A few women nodded vigorously. One pulled out her phone to take notes. "She really is incredible," whispered a soft voice behind me. I turned to find Claire, Julia's neighbor from 2 doors down, watching from the doorway with admiration. Such a natural leader. I mean, who else could get us all to show up for a Saturday pitch? I smiled politely. "She's certainly persuasive." "I'm Claire, by the way," she said, offering a manicured hand. "You must be Julia's." I waited. "Tenant," she tried, then quickly added, "Or, relative?" "I'm her mother," I said pleasantly. "Margaret." Her eyes widened. Oh wow. I didn't realize. Julia mentioned someone was staying in the guest suite, but I assumed, well, she didn't say you were her mom. I handed her a cup of soup. "She doesn't say a lot of things." Claire sipped. Her expression changed instantly. "This is incredible. You made this." "Old family recipe," I said. She took another spoonful, savoring it. "I haven't had anything this good in ages. You should bottle this stuff. Sell it." Julia is selling lifestyle. I suppose I'm selling lentils. Claire laughed, then sobered. "If it were me, I'd be shouting from the rooftops. My mom's a master cook. Come over." I smiled faintly. Not exactly her branding. Back in the dining room, Julia was demonstrating her custom Glenhaven Command Binder, a glossy leather-bound planner system that she claimed kept her business scaling and her family thriving. "And of course," she added with a perfectly timed nod toward the hallway, "I have support. You can't manage a 6-figure client list and maintain presence at home without strategic delegation." Strategic delegation. That was me. A bullet point in her pitch deck. When the women filtered into the kitchen for post-presentation nourishment, I served bowls of soup and smiled graciously. I knew how to play this part. Years of hosting community fundraisers, PTA galas, and city council receptions had taught me the art of warm formality. What these women didn't know was that the woman in the guest room had once been more respected than any of them. "So, what did you do before moving here?" Claire asked casually, as we rinsed bowls together. "I was the director of the Oak Hill Public Library System," I said. 22 branches, 400 staff. Oversaw funding, expansion, literacy programs, and digital equity projects. Claire blinked. "Wait, you're Margaret Hill? The Margaret Hill?" The one who launched the mobile learning bus during the pandemic? I nodded. Claire turned to the woman beside her. Janine, you remember the bus that delivered books and Wi-Fi hotspots all over Oak Hill during lockdown? That was her. The ripple began. Oh my God, Janine said. My sister teaches kindergarten. That bus was a lifesaver. Another woman leaned in. Didn't you also run the citywide book drive? And the teen internship program? Word spread fast in Glenhaven. What had been a collection of lifestyle disciples was morphing into something else. Curious professionals with real admiration for the woman they'd just discovered behind the soup. Julia, returning with a tray of branded herbal teas, froze as she caught sight of her guests clustered around me. I had no idea you were so connected, Claire whispered. Neither did my daughter, apparently, I said lightly. Julia inserted herself quickly. Mom's being modest. She's retired now, but she did great work back in the day. Now she's helping us out here while things settle. Helping us out. As if I were on loan from a temp agency. Well, she should teach a class, Claire said, turning to Julia. Honestly, if your mom held a workshop on community strategy or event management, I'd pay for that. The others chimed in with nods and eager agreement. I didn't say a word, but I did notice the flicker in Julia's eyes, the momentary falter in her flawless exterior. This wasn't part of her plan. I wasn't supposed to become visible. I was supposed to stay quietly useful. Charming but background. Helpful but unimportant. But visibility, once sparked, spreads fast. By the following Tuesday, I received a call from the Glenhaven Civic Alliance, asking if I'd be interested in consulting on their new literacy outreach program. A small stipend, they said. Just a few hours a week. I hadn't even applied. And that was only the beginning. Because if Julia wanted to run Glenhaven on appearances and buzzwords, she'd just been reminded what real influence looked like. Not curated. Not hashtagged. Earned. And I hadn't even started yet. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, tucked into a linen envelope with my name hand-lettered in calligraphy across the front. The Glenhaven Civic Gala, a celebration of community resilience and vision. Saturday, 6 p.m. black tie. Location, the Oakwood Clubhouse. I recognized the address immediately. The Oakwood Clubhouse wasn't just the social heart of Glenhaven, it was the nerve center. Fundraisers, galas, wine tastings, HOA decisions, if it mattered, it happened there. Julia found the envelope first, of course. This came for you, she said, holding it out with a bright, brittle smile. Though it's probably a mistake. The Civic Gala is mostly for board members and invited speakers. I opened the envelope slowly, letting her stew in her own discomfort. Inside was a formal card with gold embossed lettering. Margaret Hill, Community Strategist, Glenhaven Outreach Advisor. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly what it meant. I'd been asked to give the opening address. Craig looked up from his laptop. That's a hell of a title, Margaret. I smiled modestly. It's honorary, I imagine, for helping draft the new literacy partnership proposal. Julia tried to laugh. That's adorable. You know, they do this sometimes for optics, sprinkle in a few legacy faces for diversity and tradition. Keeps the donors happy. She said it like she wasn't 5 years younger than me and using Botox to keep up with her filters. Still, Craig added, it's a public platform. Big crowd. Hope they give you a mic that works. They will, I replied. I used to speak in front of 400-person school boards without one. Projection is second nature. Julia blinked, not sure whether to be impressed or threatened. Probably both. For the next several days, she tried her best to pretend the invitation hadn't happened. But the ripples had already begun. Pamela from the Glenhaven Events Committee asked if I'd consider co-chairing their annual winter literacy drive. Your track record with the mobile library program is legendary, Margaret, she'd said. Everyone still talks about it. Elaine, the gala's lead decorator, asked for my input on the centerpiece arrangements. You've got such an eye, she insisted, and I'd love to get your take on the seating chart. We want the room to feel grounded. I knew what she meant. They wanted someone with substance in the room, not just manicured ambition. On the morning of the gala, Julia hovered around the kitchen, nervously checking her phone, curling her hair twice, and complaining about the valet situation. She wore a sleek black evening gown that flared at the hips, expensive, dramatic, and designed to be noticed. I wore an old navy blue gown from my days on the library board. The sleeves were slightly looser, the waist a bit tighter, but it still fit. And it still made me feel like myself. "You'll be riding with us, right?" she asked, fastening her diamond studs. "No need to call a car." "I'll meet you there," I said. I was asked to arrive early for a sound check. Julia's smile faltered.
"Right.
"Because of your address."
Well,
"Just be mindful. A lot of the donors will be there. Try not to get too personal." Craig looked up from adjusting his cufflinks. "I think what Julia means is, it's probably best to keep it short and sweet. People don't come to these things for speeches." "Noted," I said mildly, slipping on a pair of low heels. "And thank you both for your guidance." They left 15 minutes later. I waited an extra 5 before my own car arrived, a silver town car sent by the Civic Alliance. I stepped inside, settled into the leather seat, and allowed myself a rare indulgence. A smile. It was a small thing being asked to speak, but it was the right thing. It wasn't about glory, it was about truth. Recognition. Context. I arrived at the Oakwood Clubhouse to find the room already glowing with soft candlelight and clinking glasses. People were streaming in, donors in tuxedos, Glenhaven executives, foundation leaders. And everywhere I turned, I was greeted by warm familiarity. "Margaret. So glad you're here. Finally, we meet in person. I've read so much about your work. Can I steal a moment later to talk about the education mentorship program?" Not one person asked about Julia. Not one person mentioned the word guest suite. Elaine led me to the stage while the final arrangements were made. A teleprompter glowed faintly near the podium. I declined. "Don't need it," I said. At 6:30 sharp, the room dimmed, and the MC took the stage. Tonight's opening remarks come from a woman whose work during the pandemic kept families educated and connected, whose quiet return to public life has reinvigorated our community's outreach goals. Please welcome Margaret Hill. Applause. Not polite clapping. Not obligatory noise. Real, sustained applause. I stepped up slowly, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the sea of faces. Among them, Julia and Craig, sitting at table 6. I took a breath and began. "Good evening. My name is Margaret Hill. For many years, I served as director of the Oak Hill Public Library System. During that time, I learned something fundamental. Access changes everything. The right book in the right hands at the right moment can change a life." I spoke not for applause, but for truth. About children who studied by flashlight in shelters, about the seniors who learned to use tablets to connect with family, about librarians who became frontline workers during a time of fear. I didn't come to Glenhaven to relive old glories. I came as a guest in my daughter's home, a guest in this neighborhood. But what I've found here is not just a place to land, but a place to begin again. I'm honored to contribute, even in small ways, to a community that still believes in shared growth. The last line lingered, hanging between praise and consequence. Applause again, this time thunderous. As I stepped off stage, hands reached out to shake mine, people rose to greet me, and I caught Craig looking uneasy. Julia was still clapping, but her eyes were glassy, unreadable. During dessert, Claire leaned over from the table beside theirs and whispered, "Your speech was incredible. I think some people are going to start asking very different questions about your daughter." I smiled, but said nothing. I wasn't here to expose Julia. I was here to exist where she hadn't wanted me to take up space in the very community she had hoped would never look too closely at the woman in the guest room. But now they had. And soon so would she. A week after the gala, the shift in the house became palpable. Not spoken, not direct, but unmistakable. Julia started closing doors more often, especially when she took calls. Craig, once awkwardly polite, now seemed openly irritated by my presence, sighing when he passed me in the hallway or pausing his podcast mid-sentence if I entered the kitchen. Even the kids noticed. "Grandma," Lily whispered one morning as I helped her with her spelling words, "did Mommy get in trouble?" I blinked. "Why do you ask?" "She's been grumpy since your speech." Out of the mouths of babes. That afternoon, Julia left a folded document outside my door. No post-it note this time, just the silent weight of printed words on thick paper. I read the first line and understood immediately what this was. An updated lease. Revised clauses. Adjusted terms. Clause 4. Tenant shall refrain from engaging in any public-facing roles or professional speaking events which may conflict with the household's privacy or reputation. Clause 6. Tenant shall submit for approval any affiliations with Glenhaven committees, boards, or outreach programs prior to accepting. Clause 8. Public commentary regarding other members of the household is strictly prohibited during formal or informal community events. The word tenant repeated over and over like a branding iron. Burn it in. Remember your place. And then Clause 12. Failure to comply with the above terms may result in lease termination with 14 days' notice. I read it twice, then a third time, the implications settling in like ash. She was trying to silence me, to restrict me, to reclaim a shrinking power over something she'd begun to lose grip of: how I was seen, who I was to this community. And most telling of all, Julia didn't even hand it to me directly. She left it at my door like a coward. At dinner, the silence was so thick you could chew it. Lily babbled about her school project. Nate, their youngest, asked Craig to look at his paper airplane. Julia poked at her quinoa salad like it had personally offended her. I waited until the table had quieted. I reviewed the revised lease, I said calmly, slicing a piece of salmon. Interesting additions. Julia didn't look up. It's just to avoid confusion. Boundaries. Of course, I nodded. For example, I was particularly intrigued by the clause that states I must refrain from community engagement unless approved. Craig cleared his throat. It's standard. Reputation management. Many families in Glenhaven have similar agreements with house staff. House staff, I repeated. Is that how I'm listed now? Don't be dramatic, Mom, Julia said, now clearly irritated. It's just a formality. After the gala, people are asking questions. Some even think you live here, because I can't support you. It reflects poorly on our household. And the clause about commentary? I pressed. Does that mean I'm forbidden from answering when someone asks me how I'm doing? Julia's voice sharpened. You're twisting this. No, Julia, I said, folding my napkin. You are. You're twisting what was supposed to be support for your mother into a legal contract with censorship clauses. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back against the tile. You want to be the martyr, the wise elder. Fine, but not at my expense. Craig added quietly, this isn't about silencing you. It's about protecting what we've built. I smiled then because for the first time, they had said the quiet part out loud. What they'd built wasn't family. It was image, appearances, curation. I stood too, slower, calmer. You've built your life on optics, I said. A shiny house, polished branding, perfect presentations. But all it takes is one genuine truth to show the cracks. I took the lease and placed it on the table. I won't be signing this. You don't have a choice, Julia snapped. This is our house. Which is why, I said, retrieving a folded piece of paper from my cardigan pocket, I've decided to move out. I've secured unit at the Elms. First month's deposit is paid. I move in next Friday. Julia blinked. Craig said, You what? I met Julia's eyes. You wanted boundaries? Here they are. I'm done being your tenant. I'll be your mother again, or nothing at all. Her mouth opened and closed. For once, she had no script. No spin. Lily, who had gone quiet, whispered, You're leaving? I knelt beside her chair. Just to a new place down the road. You'll visit all the time. And we'll bake cookies without being told we're in the way. She smiled weakly and hugged me. Craig stood and pushed his plate away. This is absurd. Julia didn't speak. Later that evening, a text from Claire arrived. Heard what happened. If you need help moving next week, I've got boxes and strong wine. And then another. Also, you were the talk of the PTA mixer. Apparently, everyone's asking how they can get you on their board. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I returned to my room, but only for 6 more days. I stared at the framed photo of Julia at her college graduation that I'd kept on my nightstand. In it, I'm hugging her in the pouring rain, my hair soaked, her cap crooked, both of us laughing like fools. That girl, that version of her, felt like a stranger now. But perhaps this distance would allow us both to remember who we were, who we might be again if we tried. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. This wasn't a war. It was a boundary. And the time had come to draw it in ink, not pencil. The movers came at 9 a.m. sharp. 3 young men in branded t-shirts, polite and efficient, carried my labeled boxes out of Julia's guest suite while Craig lingered awkwardly near the front door and Julia stayed on a work call in her home office for over an hour. She hadn't said a single word to me that morning. Not good luck. Not thank you. Not goodbye. I didn't expect a ceremony, but a mother shouldn't have to leave under the same silence as a fired contractor. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them lift the last box labeled Books and Memories into the back of the van. The air smelled like freshly watered grass and citrus, Glenhaven's version of spring. Perfect, sterilized, artificially manicured. But for the first time in weeks, I could breathe in it. The Elms Senior Community wasn't technically a retirement complex, just a quiet, well-designed development on the edge of town where everyone minded their own business and HOA meetings lasted under 20 minutes. My new unit was compact but full of light. Bay windows, built-in shelves, a small reading nook that would become my sanctuary. I unpacked quickly, organizing essentials with the efficiency only librarians and mothers know. And as I stood in the middle of my own space, furniture just slightly misaligned, a lamp tilted at an odd angle, I smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. That evening, I hosted 3 guests. Claire arrived first, arms full, Trader Joe's flowers, a bottle of wine, and a Tupperware of chicken tikka masala sheet, over-ordered on purpose. Then came Pamela from the Civic Alliance with printouts and highlighters and a clipboard already halfway full of ideas for the literacy mentorship program. And last, with a sheepish knock and a grocery bag full of homemade muffins, came Elaine. "I hope it's okay I stopped by," she said. I figured this might be a big day. I welcomed them all warmly. We sipped wine on my little balcony and made toasts with paper napkins. They asked questions about my past work, about what I envisioned for Glenhaven's new outreach programs, about whether I'd consider speaking at their Women in Leadership brunch next month. At one point, Pamela said, there's been talk about nominating someone new for the Glenhaven board this fall. We need fresh air." I raised an eyebrow. "I've barely moved in." "That's exactly why you're perfect," Claire said. "No one's beholden to you. And everyone remembers what you've done." Elaine chimed in. "Plus, let's just say your daughter's approach to leadership left a mixed impression." I said nothing. Just poured more wine. Let them draw their own conclusions. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Julia.
"Can we talk?
The kids are asking a lot of questions. Lily cried when she realized you weren't coming back tonight." I stared at the message for a long time. It was the first real outreach in weeks that didn't come with terms or instructions. I replied, "I'd love to see them. Sunday brunch? My place. Just the 3 of us. You can drop them off."
She didn't argue. Didn't ask to stay.
"Okay. I'll bring them at 10. Sunday came. The knock was soft, followed by 2 squealing voices shouting "Grandma" in stereo. I knelt as Lily and Nate wrapped their arms around me, their jackets slipping from their tiny shoulders. "Is this really your house?" Nate asked, eyes wide. "It is," I said proudly. "Want to see the reading nook?" They gasped like I'd revealed a hidden treasure vault. We spent the next hour drinking cocoa, reading books, and building a pillow fort in the center of my living room. At 11:30, there was another knock. "Julia." I opened the door, surprised.
I
I just wanted to see it, she said, eyes flicking around the space. To know where they'll be. I stepped aside without a word. She took it in, subtly elegant furniture, framed photos from her childhood, cookbooks on the shelf, the exact same embroidered throw she once tossed in the donation pile now folded neatly on my armchair.
This is nice, she said.
It's peaceful, I replied. Her eyes rested on Lily and Nate inside the pillow fort, now giggling uncontrollably over a storybook about a farting dinosaur. I didn't mean for things to go the way they did, she murmured. With the lease. With everything. I felt judged. Like you were slipping back into your old roles and everyone suddenly forgot that I built a life too. Julia, I said gently, I never judged you for building a life. I judged you for trying to reduce mine. She flinched. I softened. You have every right to succeed, but not at the expense of rewriting who I am. You wanted to be seen as your own woman. That's fair. But don't ask me to disappear in the process. She sat down slowly. The lease, that was wrong. Craig drafted it, but I approved it. I was scared. I waited. Scared that people would stop seeing me and only see you. That I'd be someone's daughter again instead of someone. I nodded slowly. You're someone. But part of who you are, part of what makes you powerful, is where you came from. Who raised you? Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know if I can fix this. It's not about fixing, I said. It's about building something better with what remains. Julia looked at her kids again, then at me. Would it be okay if next Sunday I came too? I hesitated, just long enough for her to notice, but then nodded.
Yes.
As long as you leave the contract at home. A smile broke across her face.
Small. Tentative.
But real.
Deal.
2 weeks after I moved into the Elms, I received a voicemail that made me pause mid-step while unloading groceries. Hi, Ms. Hill. This is Principal Dawson from Glenhaven Elementary. I know this is out of the blue, but we're holding a school-wide literacy assembly next Friday. One of the teachers mentioned you had deep experience in library systems and student programming. Would you be willing to speak to our students? We'd be honored. I played it again just to make sure I heard it right. We'd be honored. Not would you do us a favor. Not we're desperate. Not since you're not doing anything else. That evening, as I packed Lily and Nate's lunchboxes for Julia, her latest Sunday morning drop-off, I casually mentioned it. I've been asked to speak at the elementary school's assembly next week, I said, checking the expiration date on the yogurt tubes. Julia blinked from across the kitchen island. They reached out to you?
Yes.
Principal Dawson. That's surprising. She poured herself coffee with deliberate casualness. Did they say why? I imagine word's gotten around about the literacy initiative, I said lightly. Also, Mrs. Gable, Lily's second-grade teacher, used to attend one of the outreach programs I ran years ago. I suppose it made an impression. Julia didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, You know, I used to love when you visited my school as a guest reader. I smiled faintly. I remember. You used to correct my pronunciation if I rushed. Her laugh was real that time. Still a stickler. On the day of the assembly, I wore navy slacks and a cream blouse. No fanfare. Just neat, grounded, and present. I arrived early and was met in the main office by a young assistant who couldn't have been older than 22. Oh my gosh, she said, my dad had you as a speaker back in high school. He still talks about the Lunch and Learn series on social justice and debate. Said it changed the way he thought. I chuckled. Tell your dad I said thank you. And that it's okay if he still pronounces allegory wrong. We all have our burdens. The gymnasium was already half full of squirming children by the time I stepped onto the makeshift stage. Teachers arranged rows of students, kindergarten through 5th grade, sitting cross-legged with eager faces. I adjusted the microphone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Hill, and once upon a time, I was in a room just like this one, trying very hard to keep my knees from falling asleep during an assembly. So if you're already a little fidgety, don't worry. I understand. A wave of giggles swept the front rows. I came here today not just to talk about reading, I continued, but about what happens when you find the right story at the right time. Because stories do more than entertain us. They remind us who we are. They help us build bridges to places we didn't know we could go. I told them about the boy who learned empathy from a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web, about the girl who overcame her stutter by reading aloud from comic books in the mirror, about the homeless teen who used the mobile library to finish his GED and later returned to donate his first published book to our shelves. The room was quiet, really quiet. Even the fifth graders had stopped pretending to be bored. And, I added, reading teaches you that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to make the biggest impact. You just have to know your story and tell it when it counts. When I stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was real. A few students stood to clap. One teacher wiped away tears. Outside the gym, as parents filtered in for pickup, I spotted Julia. She hadn't said she was coming. "Your daughter was the first to raise her hand during the Q&A," she said as I approached. I smiled. What did she ask? She said, "Did my grandma invent reading buses or just fix them when they broke?" I laughed. "I suppose both." Julia's gaze softened. "You're really good at this." "It's what I do," I replied simply. "It's what I've always done." "I never really saw it before," she admitted. Or maybe I saw it, but didn't understand what it meant. I studied her expression. No defensiveness. No attempt to spin it. Just honesty. "We don't always understand things when we're living them," I said gently. "Sometimes it takes distance." Julia hesitated. The Glenhaven Community Board is restructuring. They've started asking members to submit new nominations. And your name's been mentioned. More than once. I didn't react. She continued. "If they ask you, will you say yes?" "I haven't decided yet," I said. "But if I do, it won't be to prove anything." Julia nodded. "I know." There was a pause. Then, with unusual vulnerability, she added, "When they ask me about my mother, I'd like to be able to say I support her work. Not because I have to, but because I finally understand what it is." I didn't reply.
Not yet.
Because apologies, even implied ones, are seeds. You don't praise them too soon. You just plant them, water them, and wait to see what they grow into. The envelope was thick, creamy, and expensive. It arrived by hand, delivered not by post, but by Pamela herself, who stood in the doorway of my unit at the Elms with a look that was half mischief, half reverence. "I would have called," she said, "but this one deserved the old-fashioned touch." I raised an eyebrow. Should I be bracing myself? She grinned and handed me the envelope. "Read it." I broke the seal slowly. Inside was a single page printed on Glenhaven's Civic Alliance letterhead. "Dear Ms. Margaret Hill, in recognition of your continued service, community leadership, and long-standing impact in public educational programming, the Glenhaven Civic Board invites you to join as an honorary trustee at large, with full voting privileges and program oversight. We believe your voice is essential to our future direction. Respectfully, Glenhaven Civic Board Executive Committee." I blinked.
Twice.
"You're serious," I said. "As a heart attack," Pamela replied. "Unanimous vote. Claire and Elaine spearheaded it. I'd just get the fun of telling you first." I set the letter down slowly. My fingers trembled just slightly, not from fear, not from age, but from the quiet weight of being seen. "Let me guess," I said. "This isn't sitting well with certain legacy members." Pamela laughed. Julia's name didn't come up once, if that's what you're asking. And if it had, I suspect it would have been met with silence. I didn't smile. "Not yet." Pamela's tone shifted. "You've earned this, Margaret. Not just for what you did before you came to Glenhaven, but for what you've done since. You turned a guest suite into a movement. That's not something we see every day." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the oak trees lining the courtyard, I sat with the letter in my lap, turning it over slowly. It wasn't about status. It wasn't even about redemption.
It was about dignity.
Restoration. The slow, deliberate return of one's voice after it had been boxed and labeled guest. My phone buzzed. "Julia. Heard about the committee. Congratulations." "I mean that." Another buzz. Followed by, if I'm honest, I don't love how fast people turned, but I get it. You make things better. People notice. I thought for a moment. Then I replied, people turn toward honesty, not away from you. That distinction matters. What you choose to do next, that's what they'll remember. Her reply came 2 minutes later. I want to learn how to do this differently. Without the optics. Without the fear. I stared at those words for a long time. They were flawed, messy, real. And for the first time since I'd stepped into her guest room, I felt the thread between us stretch taut, not in tension, but in reconnection. The first board meeting came 3 days later. Claire picked me up in her Audi with a thermos of spiced chai and a playlist called Elegant Battle Anthems. Do we expect pushback? I asked, buckling my seatbelt. From the men in salmon-colored pants?
Possibly.
From the women who still think yoga is a personality? Definitely. The meeting room was as pristine as everything else in Glenhaven. Fresh hydrangeas on the table, custom-engraved name placards, and a display of artisanal crackers that looked too delicate to eat. The chairperson, a wiry man named Calvin who once referred to my move into Glenhaven as a quaint chapter, cleared his throat when I entered. Ms. Hill, welcome. Thank you, I replied smoothly. I'm looking forward to contributing. Pamela handed out the printed agenda. Item number 3 made my eyebrows lift slightly. Review of new outreach spending proposals. Submitted by Margaret Hill. No fanfare. No preamble. Just quietly slotted into the framework like I'd always belonged there. And in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need to take back space. I already had it, simply by refusing to surrender what I knew to be mine. During the meeting, I laid out a modest but effective plan for Glenhaven's underfunded literacy partnerships, more mobile book drives, seasonal volunteer tutoring, and a reading mentorship program linking seniors with children who needed extra support. There was pushback, of course. How will this reflect on our brand identity? One man asked, frowning over his glasses. Does the neighborhood benefit directly from these programs? Another added. Claire, bless her, leaned forward.
Yes.
You benefit when children in your community grow up with better language skills and stronger comprehension. Because those kids become the ones who eventually run the town, fund your hospitals, and yes, buy your real estate. I met the chair's eyes. And Glenhaven becomes the place where it all started. Not just the place with perfectly trimmed hedges. A slow murmur of agreement rippled around the table. The proposal passed. 8 votes to 3. When the meeting ended, Pamela squeezed my arm. You just flipped the room. I smiled faintly.
No.
I reminded them who they're sitting with. As I left, Calvin approached me with a clipped nod. Ms. Hill, you carry yourself differently than expected. Experience does that, I said. He hesitated. Your daughter, Julia, she used to talk about you in her early days here. Said you were hard. I raised an eyebrow. Hard, demanding, particular, precise. I shrugged. I ran the largest library network in Oak County for 28 years. If that makes me hard, I'll take it. He blinked. She didn't mention your community work, or that you'd built literacy programs people still use. That was her choice, I replied. Not mine. Calvin straightened. Well, I'll say this, you're a force. I nodded politely. You're just noticing. That night, I returned home to a quiet apartment and a text from Julia. Lily wants you to come to career day. She told her class you're famous now. I smiled. Not because of pride, but because maybe, just maybe, my granddaughter was starting to understand something her mother had taken far too long to learn. You don't need a title to be important. You just need to be true. The school hallway smelled the same as every elementary hallway I'd ever walked through. Antiseptic and old crayons, a whiff of glue stick, sneakers squeaking faintly on polished floors. A nostalgia so precise it could break your heart if you weren't careful. A student volunteer led me to Lily's classroom. Inside, the desks were arranged in a loose horseshoe. Brightly colored construction paper signs labeled the stations: firefighter, veterinarian, architect, fashion designer. And in the corner, decorated with a paper cutout of a giant open book, stood a folding chair, a tiny reading lamp, and a large sign in glitter glue that read, "My Grandma Margaret, Story Magician." I laughed softly, then blinked back something warmer in my chest. Lily was beaming. She made the sign herself, her teacher whispered, smiling. And she insisted we not say librarian because magician is cooler. When it was my turn, I sat down in the little chair, knees folded awkwardly, and looked out at a sea of round eyes and swinging legs. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Margaret Hill, and once upon a time, I believed books could solve every problem." A few kids giggled. But then I learned something more important. Books don't just solve problems. They introduce you to yourself. I opened the story I'd brought, an old favorite about a shy girl who learns to speak her mind through a talking notebook, and halfway through, I noticed something strange. Julia was standing just outside the classroom window, watching. No phone in hand, no clipboard, no performance, just present. When the story ended, the children clapped, and a few even asked if I had more magical books. Lily wrapped both arms around my waist. "You're the best ones so far." I leaned down. "Don't tell the veterinarian that." Outside, I found Julia leaning against the brick wall, arms crossed but relaxed. "You really are good at that," she said softly. "I've had practice." She looked down at her shoes. "Lily's been bragging about you for 2 weeks. Apparently, she thinks you founded literacy." "Only in my spare time." Julia smiled, then hesitated. "Can we grab a coffee?" We walked down the block to a small cafe she liked, neutral walls, soft jazz, oat milk, everything. She ordered our drinks while I found a seat near the window. She returned, sliding a mug across the table. I waited. She didn't dodge it this time. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, about support and dignity and all the ways I got it wrong." I said nothing. "I looked through some of your old press clippings," she added. "I found articles. Letters from parents. Photos of that reading bus covered in paint from kids' handprints. I kept some of that," I said. "But most of it was in my head." "Well," Julia said quietly, "I wish I'd kept it in mine." She took a sip of coffee. "When I brought you into our house, I thought I was being generous, practical, even fair. I didn't realize until later that what I was doing was shrinking you, diminishing your legacy to protect my own." I studied her face. No mascara, no filters, just my daughter as she once was. Or maybe as she was trying to become again. "I was embarrassed," she continued. "I thought if people knew I'd taken you in, they'd think I'd failed somehow, that I wasn't enough." "But Julia," I said gently, "you weren't taking me in. You were walling me out with rules, uniforms, and contracts. You didn't treat me like a mother. You treated me like a liability." Her eyes filled, and she looked down. "I know," she whispered. "I know that now. And I don't expect forgiveness. Not yet. But I want to do something real. Something that shows I've learned." I raised an eyebrow. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed pages, some with handwritten notes in the margins. "What's this?" "A proposal," she said, pushing it toward me. "I've started developing a Glenhaven Literacy Fund, dedicated to mobile access, reading workshops, community mentorship. In your name." I was stunned. "I wanted to start with you," she added. "But I don't want to control it. I want you to lead it." I opened the folder, scanning her notes. "Modest beginnings, $5,000 seed fund, 1 van, rotating volunteer schedule. But scalable, thoughtful." There was a signature line at the bottom of the draft charter. It read, "Margaret Hill, Founding Director. Julia Hayward, Coordinator, Family Access and Outreach." I looked up. "I don't need my name on this." Julia nodded. "I do." We sat there in silence for a moment, long enough for the waitress to refill our mugs without asking. "I don't know if we'll ever go back to what we were," Julia said finally. "But maybe we can build forward into something better." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "I'm willing to try." For the first time in a long while, her fingers didn't pull away. They stayed, anchored. They called it a soft launch. Just a modest Saturday event in the Glen Haven Community Center parking lot. A ribbon cutting, a few speeches, a table of donated muffins, and a small crowd of curious residents, former students, local librarians, and, remarkably, a full third of the Glen Haven Civic Board. The van itself was simple. White, secondhand, its side repainted in navy with hand-lettered gold script that read, "The Margaret Hill Literacy Bus. Stories move us." Beneath it, Julia's name, smaller, subtle, as outreach coordinator. "Are you ready?" Claire asked me as she handed over the ceremonial scissors. I looked around at the people gathering, Pamela holding court near the muffins, Elaine arranging the donation box, Lily handing out bookmarks she'd made with glitter pens. Even Craig was here, standing stiffly in a blazer he clearly hadn't worn since their wedding, trying to make himself useful by passing out juice boxes. Julia stood beside me, dressed simply in slacks and a navy blouse that matched the bus. Her hair was tied back. No makeup. No performance. Just my daughter. "Ready," she echoed. I nodded. Let's give them a reason to remember why stories matter. The ribbon cut with a satisfying snip. Polite applause gave way to cheers when Lily ran through the doors of the bus yelling, "It smells like books and magic." And just like that, the program was real. The first guest speaker was a woman I'd mentored 20 years earlier, a former dropout who now ran after-school programs for literacy-challenged youth. She spoke about finding a copy of The House on Mango Street in one of my community bins and how it led her to a GED, then a degree, then a calling. "She never told me I needed to read," she said, smiling at me. "She just left books where I could find them. Books that knew me before I knew myself." There wasn't a dry eye in the parking lot. After the speeches, kids flooded into the bus, pulling down copies of Magic Tree House and Diary of a Wimpy Kid like it was Christmas morning. Lily found me at the back of the van, where I was reshelving a stack of gently used books. "Grandma," she whispered, "everyone says you're famous now." I laughed. "I'm old, sweetheart. That's different." "No," she said, hugging me tightly. "You're the most important person here." Julia stood nearby, watching, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a very long time.
Pride.
Not in what I'd done, but in who I was. Later, as the crowd thinned and the volunteers packed up, Julia approached me with a clipboard in hand. "You still haven't signed the founding charter," she said. "Am I required to?" "No," she replied, "but I think it's important." I took the pen she offered. Beneath the words "Founding Director," I signed my name.
Carefully.
Proudly. And then something unexpected happened. Julia handed me a sealed manila envelope. "What's this?" "Something I should have given you weeks ago." Inside was the original tenant lease. Voided. Marked with a red stamp across the top. She'd crossed out tenant in every clause and replaced it by hand with mother. At the very bottom, she'd added a handwritten line. "I do feed extra mouths. Especially the ones that once fed me." I looked up slowly, unsure of whether to speak. Julia swallowed. "You were right. I treated you like an obligation. But you're not. You're the foundation. I couldn't have built anything without you, and I don't want it anymore." I folded the paper neatly. "I accept the apology," I said. "But not as payment. As progress." Her breath caught. "Does that mean we're okay?" "It means," I said, "you're finally seeing the difference between inheritance and legacy." That night, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but full in a way I hadn't felt in years. A text came in as I changed into pajamas. Glen Haven Community Record just published an article about today's event. Headline: "The Guest Room Revolution: How a Mother Rewrote a Town's Story." "You okay with that title?" I smiled. I would have called it "The Lease Was the Lie." But sure, that works. A second message followed. "Do you want to come over for dinner next week? No uniforms. No paperwork. Just family." And I replied simply, "I'd like that."
Let's see what we build next.
6 months later, I stood in a room that didn't exist when I first moved to Glen Haven. It had once been a forgotten annex at the edge of the community center, musty and used, filled with broken folding chairs and old choir robes no one wanted to throw away. Now it was lined with bookshelves painted sky blue, soft beanbags in every corner, string lights draped from the ceiling like stars. A small placard on the wall read, "The Margaret Hill Community Reading Room. Open to all. Bound by stories." We were holding our first family literacy night. Julia coordinated the event. Not in a showy way, not to be photographed, not to prove anything, but because she believed in it. She stood in the back now, clipboard at her side, hair tucked behind one ear, nodding along as Lily read Where the Wild Things Are Allowed to a group of toddlers. "Is it strange?" Pamela whispered beside me. "Seeing her like this after everything?" I watched as Julia knelt beside a child struggling with the word terrible, gently guiding him until his eyes lit up with understanding.
No, I said.
"It's not strange. It's right." The room was filled with the kind of joyful chaos I'd dreamed of during the cold, silent mornings in Julia's guest suite. Children darting between bookshelves. Parents asking each other for recommendations. Volunteers handing out free library cards funded by the Literacy Bus program. The cards were simple, laminated blue. Each one bore a quote Julia had insisted on including. "You don't need a title to be important. You just need to be true." Margaret Hill. When I first saw it, I'd been speechless. That had been the quote from my school assembly months earlier. The one I'd tossed out lightly, never imagining it would linger with her. Now, every new reader in Glenhaven would carry it in their pocket. Near the end of the night, Julia approached with Lily at her side, holding a stack of library cards in her tiny hands. "Mom," Julia said carefully, "I've been offered a new position." I raised an eyebrow. "Community Development Liaison," she continued. "It's part of a citywide initiative to bring Glenhaven-style outreach to underfunded districts."
They want me to help design it.
"That's big," I said. "Are you ready?" She nodded. "Not because I have all the answers, but because I finally know where to look for them." "And where's that?"
She met my eyes.
"The people who were invisible to me when I was too busy curating a version of myself."
You.
"Others. The ones I called extra mouths." Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, I saved the last library card for you." She handed it to me with both hands. It was already filled out. Name, Margaret Hill. Date issued, today. Issued by Lily Hayward. Honorary title, Story Magician. I knelt and hugged her so tightly she squealed. "I already have 1,000,000 books," I whispered. But now, she grinned. "You have a card." Nearby, Craig offered to help stack the leftover muffins. He'd become softer too, less transactional, more present. We hadn't had a long talk, but we didn't need one. His gestures said enough. As the night wrapped, Julia lingered behind to help me gather books into bins. "You know," she said, "I still remember the day you moved into our house. I thought I was being generous. Turns out, I was offering you a cage and calling it shelter." "And now?" I asked. She looked around the room. "Now I know the difference between shelter and welcome. Between giving someone a roof and giving them space." I nodded, quiet. "You taught me that," she added. "Not by fighting me, but by making me see what the world saw when I tried to hide you." "That wasn't my goal," I said. "I know," she whispered. "That's what made it work." Outside, the sky had gone dark, but the library bus glowed like a lantern in the distance. I watched as children lined up for bedtime books and parents chatted softly near the door. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory. This was the restoration of voice, of place,
Of self.
Julia turned to me one last time. "You know what people say now when I introduce myself?" "What?" "You're Margaret Hill's daughter." I smiled. "About time." She laughed. And this time, it wasn't bitter or nervous or curated. It was hers. It was real. As I stepped into the night, I slipped the library card into my coat pocket, fingers brushing against it as if it were something sacred. A quiet reminder that a woman once forced to sign a lease in her own daughter's home now signed library cards in her own name. That being seen, truly seen, was not a favor to be granted. It was a right that, when denied, could move mountains once reclaimed. And in Glenhaven, the woman in the guest room had rewritten the whole story. If you believe no one should ever have to sign a lease just to be treated like family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story.